Well, welcome again to our small group study in the book of Romans. Thank you for joining me this week. I want to start our study today with a question for you. Actually, maybe it's a thought experiment, or maybe it's something you're experiencing right now in your life. You might be home right now homeschooling your kids for the first time. They're trying to do their schoolwork they get sent home with, or they're getting over the internet. You're trying to have them do their math, or have them figure out how to do that algebraic equation or something like that, and they're struggling, you're struggling, and they just want another cookie. What do they do to curry your favor? What do they do to win you over, to get you to get them that cookie? You see, they're trying to get something from you by doing something. Well, today in the book of Romans chapter 10, Paul is going to talk about salvation through doing stuff and salvation through faith alone. And he's going to settle on faith alone being the only way that we receive salvation. That righteousness only comes to us through faith, not by doing. He begins chapter 10 by continuing his discussion from chapter 9, which was about Israel. And he begins by saying a praise for Israel, praise for his brothers daily so that they will be saved. You see, the Israelites have a great zeal for the Lord. They have a great passion for the Lord, but they just don't understand his righteousness. Instead of submitting to God's righteousness, they're trying to manufacture their own righteousness by doing things that they think will please God. So Paul starts off the chapter saying, but he goes to chapter 4 and verse 4, and he says this. He says, "For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes." J.B. Phillips translates that a little bit differently. He says, "For Christ means to end the struggle for righteousness by the law for everyone who believes." Okay then, so if the righteousness by the law does not work, if that struggle is over, how then is justification, how then is salvation made possible? Well, Paul gives us a clue back in chapter 9, verse 30. He says it's by faith. But maybe you're thinking, didn't a lot of the Old Testament talk about the law? Wasn't it central to communicating with God? Wasn't it central to communing with God? Didn't Moses have a lot to say about the law? He wrote, 5 books back there. Well, actually, thank you. Moses did have a lot to say about the law. So let's look at Moses. Let's talk about Moses just for a minute. Look at verse 5 in chapter 10. "For Moses writes about the righteousness that is based on the law, that the person who does the commandments shall live by them." Perfect. Case closed. We've got the answer. Obey the commandments. All the commandments. Every day. For all of your life. And you'll live. That's it. Perfect. We got it figured out. No. That is righteousness. That is the struggle of righteousness of the law. And that struggle has been removed. That struggle has been taken away. So we've been replaced with righteousness by faith. In Galatians 3, verse 23, Paul says that the law existed to point us to Christ because we can never obey all the law. And that struggle was and is real. And that struggle exists so that we can go to Christ so that we receive righteousness by faith instead of righteousness through a struggle to do things and to do stuff over and over every day, all day, trying to win his favor. Before we go any further in the book of Romans, we need to go back to the book of Deuteronomy for just a second because I want you to see a picture that Paul is going to use to explain this to his readers. So go to Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 11 through 19. So go read that and then come back and we'll discuss it. So in this passage, Moses is getting the people ready to go into the land he promised them. He's taken them out of Egypt, a land full of idols. He's taking them into a land of Canaan, which is currently full of idols. And he's getting them ready to take that land. And he's saying, look, to do that, to prosper in that land, you're going to need to follow me. You're going to need to not follow after these idols. You're going to need to know how to follow me. Well, how do you know how to follow God? How do you know what to do? Do I need to go up on a mountain, go on some quest and find the law somewhere and bring it back and share it with everybody? Do I need to go across the sea, across the depths and find this magical box that has all of God's laws in it, all of God's commandments, all of God's how-to kit. That's it. Go on a quest and find God's how-to kit and come back, and that way you'll know how to live in the land. No, Moses says you don't have to go on a quest. You don't have to go get an instruction manual to figure it out, because it's in your mouth and it's in your heart. Think back to Deuteronomy Chapter 6 with me. It says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise." They didn't have to go on a quest to find God's law. They didn't have to go look for it. They had to figure it out. They already knew it. Love God with everything that you are. Now, Paul's going to pick up on that picture of going on a quest, to help explain faith, righteousness by faith to the Romans. So let's look at Romans chapter 10, verses 6 through 8. "But the righteousness based on faith says, 'Do not say in your heart, who shall ascend to heaven?' That is to bring Christ down. Or who shall descend into the abyss? That is to bring Christ up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith that we proclaim." So remember, Paul is responding to this idea of having to do actions to receive God's righteousness. He's saying that you don't have to go up into heaven and bring Jesus down. You don't have to go into the depths and raise Jesus from the dead. He says, no, you don't have to go on some grand journey, some great quest. One person actually put it like this. He says, "No heroic attempt to storm the citadel of heaven or the kingdom of the dead are needed. Christ the Savior is here, incarnate and risen." Paul says that the path to righteousness, the path to salvation, is close at hand. It's in your mouth and it's in your heart. Let's continue looking at Romans chapter 10, verse 9 and 10. He says, "Because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved." The path to righteousness isn't some great quest. The path to salvation isn't something to be found by going and doing things. The path to salvation is in your heart and it's in your mouth. It's in believing and confessing. Believing that Christ was raised from the dead and confessing him as Lord. These aren't two sequential things. We don't do one and then the other. We do them together. It's two aspects of one whole. First, we confess that Jesus is Lord. Now, it's interesting, the word Paul uses there for Lord is the same word that the Greek translation of the Old Testament that they would have had at that time uses to explain who God is. It's the word that they used for Yahweh. And so what Paul's doing is Paul's saying Jesus, by confessing Jesus as Lord, you're confessing him as being sovereign. You're saying that he is over everything. He's in charge. But what does it mean to be sovereign in one's life? What does it mean to be sovereign in my life? Means that he's in charge of my life. It's going to the king and bowing down before him and saying, you're in charge. I'll do as you like. You see, we don't struggle and strive and try and do to get salvation. But once salvation is bestowed upon us, we strive to live like the king would want us to live, because we've said to him, you're my king, and I want to live the way you want me to live. So we confess Jesus as Lord when we believe that he was raised from the dead. Now that phrase raised from the dead just doesn't mean believe that he was raised from the dead like Lazarus was raised from the dead. No, it's raised from the dead encompasses the whole passion of Christ, that he came as the incarnate God. He came and lived a sinless life. He died in my place on the cross. He was buried. He rose from the dead, and he ascended to heaven, and he's coming back one day. Raised from the dead means believing that, meaning believing who Jesus is and what Jesus has done. So I want you to pause for a second and discuss this question. How might the idea of gaining salvation, gaining righteousness through our actions be expressed today? I don't want us to look at other cultures. I want us to stay close at home for a second. I want us to think about the people in our circle, the people on our road, the people in our community. How might they express, how might they live out this idea that salvation comes through what we do. Sometimes we lead with that. Sometimes that's our focus, even in the church. How does the church do that? How does the church lead with, it's about what you do, not what you believe to earn salvation? So stop for a second and discuss that, and then come back and we'll talk some more. Sometimes we see this workspace righteousness when maybe we think about paying our dues to the church instead of bringing our tithes to God's kingdom. Sometimes we see a workspace righteousness when people say, when I get my life right, I'll come to church. Or maybe we see it when we insist that people get their life right before we accept them into the church. Sometimes we see it when we expect that teenager who's new to church to understand all of our church culture and all of our little church rules that we have, and we don't accept them fully until they start to act like we want them to act. Paul says we don't obtain righteousness by how we act. We obtain righteousness through belief and confession in who God is and who Jesus is. But surely you're saying there has to be some obligation, there has to be like some test before you get in, right? There's got to be something that lets some people in and some people not in, right? Surely salvation is closed off to some people. Those people aren't good enough. Well, let's go back to Romans and let's look at verses 11 through 13. For the scripture says, everyone who believes in him will not be put to shame. For there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. For the same Lord is Lord of all, bestowing his riches on all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Paul here is pulling from the book of Isaiah and Joel to make his point. And his point is this: everybody has access to salvation. Everybody has access to God's righteousness. He's writing here, and he says Jews and Greeks. And he's writing to some people who live in Rome. Later, he talks about people who get saved who are women. He talks about young people being saved. He talks about slaves being saved. Salvation is open to everyone. But let's bring it further into our culture. You know, this year we're being asked to fill out the census. It's going to ask us our gender. It's going to ask us our economic status. It's going to ask us how old we are. It's going to ask us our race. And the government's going to allot funds and political allocations based on that information, based on those demographics. You see, Christ's salvation, Christ's righteousness is not allocated based on anything having to do with what we do or who we are or what we look like or how much money we have. It's not that. Christ's righteousness and salvation is open to everyone, regardless of our age, our race, our culture, our money, anything. I want you to pause for a second and discuss this question. How should God's willingness to accept all people affect how we share the gospel? How we organize our church programs? How we allocate His money for His work? How does God's acceptance of everyone affect the way we do our life and the way we do church? Okay, so salvation is not based on what we do. It's based on belief in who Christ is and what Christ has done. And it's open to everyone. But how do people know that? How do they know to respond? How do they know how to respond? Well, Paul's going to look at that in the next couple of verses. Look at verses 14 through 15. How then will they call on him whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him on whom they have not heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. Paul outlines the process of someone getting saved. I like the way John Stott puts it. He says the essence of Paul's argument is seen if we put his 6 verbs in opposite order. Christ sends heralds. Heralds preach. People hear. Hearers believe. Believers call. And those who call are saved. So the key for believers and the key for the church is that we must herald the gospel. We must send out those who have beautiful feet. We must send out those who will tell others about righteousness obtained through faith. How do we do that? Well, in your small group, you might do that by challenging each other to be heralds. In your family, you might do that by going and doing projects in your community, going on mission trips, hosting small groups in your homes, hosting other families over who don't go to church, and sharing the love of Christ with them. Or we might do that in our church programming. We want to make sure that with things we do at church are about the gospel, not about things that make us happy, or things that we've always done, or things that we like. It needs to be things that are going to proclaim the gospel to those in our community. We might proclaim the gospel. We might be heralds of the gospel in the way we spend our money, in the way we allocate the funds that come to us personally, and the way that money's coming to the church. We support missionaries around the world. We support missionaries in Mexico. We support missionaries out west. We support missionaries here in Louisiana. We send out missionaries to the North American Mission Board. We send out missionaries to the International Mission Board. We do all this through the cooperative program, through the Southern Baptist Convention. We support missionaries through the Lottie Moon and through Annie Armstrong. And that's all good and well. We need to be doing that. But we also need to be heralding the gospel here at home, in the way we serve in our community, the way we do ministry in our church, the way we do ministry with those that we love. Maybe we do it by submitting to full-time vocational ministry. Maybe the Lord is calling you to be a teacher in the church. Maybe the Lord is calling you to be a minister in the church, to be a missionary on the field. That is a calling that we should not ignore, because God calls us out and sends us out to be heralds so that people can know how to respond and what to respond to. They respond by believing and confessing, and they're responding to the fact that Christ is Lord and that He has been raised from the dead. So my challenge for you today, for this week, is maybe you're a person who is struggling to find righteousness through what you do. Maybe you're just trying to earn God's grace, earn God's righteousness. Well, the answer to that is stop struggling. That's all come to an end with Christ. Now we receive righteousness through faith. We've always received righteousness through faith. And now's the time for us to admit that, to confess that, and make Him Lord. I want to challenge you this week. If you're struggling to do all you can to get Christ's righteousness, stop. Just confess Him as Lord and make Him Lord of your life, and believe He was raised from the dead. But maybe you're struggling as a believer. Maybe you're struggling to admit that God really does love everyone, that God really does want everyone to be part of His kingdom. Well, I want to challenge you this week to pray about that and repent of that, and to ask the Lord to help you accept all types of people. Maybe you're struggling this week to be a herald of the gospel. Maybe you're just like, you just don't have that gift, that talent, that I don't know how to do it. I don't know what to say. I don't know anything. Well, I want to challenge you. Below this video, I'm going to post a link to an app. It's called the 3 Circles. I want you to look at that and think on that. You can go to our church app. There's a way there to share the gospel with someone. And so I want to challenge you this week. Pray for the Lord to bring someone to your life. Pray for your one that we've been talking about here at the church. Who is your one? Who's the one you're going to go out to? Maybe ask the Lord to provide an opportunity for you to herald the gospel to them. And again, just challenge you this week to know that righteousness comes through faith. It's not through what we do. It's not through a bunch of actions. It's about the fact that Christ loved us, died in our place for us, and wants us to believe that and herald Him as King to those around the world. Y'all, hope to see you soon. I think we might get to do that really soon, I hope. If you need us, call us. If you have any questions for us, call us. Click on the prayer request button on our website. Send us some prayer requests. If you need to contact us, we're always here for you. Thanks.